Hey man, yo kakampe.
Hello and welcome back to another Conversations in Black. I'm Gerardy Quilu, your host. For this Conversations in Black, we'll be talking about policing Black and Indigenous lives here in Canada. And since it is Black History Month as well here in Canada, we are pleased to welcome Mr. Alain Babineau, a former RCMP staff sergeant and the OPP officer. Now he's a consultant on public security and safety, and also a social justice advocate. We'll be talking specifically about racial profiling and the ways in which we can improve policing in Canada. So without further ado, let me welcome Mr. Alain Babineau. Mr. Babineau, welcome and thank you very much for accepting our invitation.
Hey, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate this.
All right, so before we get into the depth of our conversations here, I want to know, first of all, what made you decide to become a police officer or be involved in law enforcement in any shape or form? Is it just because you know, as a kid, like the cliche stuff, you know, you want to be a firefighter, police officer, or something really prompted you in your growing up environment?
Um, well, I didn't want to become a firefighter. My brother actually went that way, but you know, I used to tell my mother when I was a kid growing up that I wanted to be a bandit or a police officer. So I think I chose the safest profession, I believe, and the wisest. I think so. But no, it's always been something I wanted to become, and I grew up. I mean, so just give you a little bit of background. I was born in Quebec City. Um, my mother was Quebecois. My father was African American, and but I was put up for adoption at a very young age. As a child, I recently reunited with my mom. She's going to be watching. Well, she's going to be watching this. She's 94,
Oh,
but
great.
uh, but yeah, she's on the internet and all that, and yeah, she's going to be watching this. So I better come correct. But yeah, so but anyways, I was adopted as a young child. I grew up in the east of Quebec City, Rivière-du-Loup, near Rivière-du-Loup area, for those of you that know. And yeah, so I grew up in white society, community, and I always was attracted to policing. And so when I was about well, after high school, I couldn't get into the to the police tech in Quebec. There's a specific program that if you want to become police officer in Quebec, you have to take that CEGEP program, and my marks weren't high enough, and so I couldn't do it. I took something else, and then I nevertheless, you could still apply to get into policing as a conventional candidate. I applied for the Strategic Quebec in the early 80s. And I got to tell you, the first interview I had with the Strategic Quebec, the interview centered around whether, how I would react if I was to be called. I'm going to use the N word just in case I offend some of your listeners, but they didn't use N, they used the actual word, and so that conversation was all around that, and I didn't get the job, and then I just didn't get the job, but in Quebec, the first strategic Quebec officer, the black officer, you didn't see anybody that of any coloring until the early 2000s. So it was a 20-year span, maybe more, before they hired their first black officers in strategic Quebec. So anyway, I didn't get discouraged. I went in trying to get in with the RCMP, and lo and behold, in the interview, that same question arose. That this was really of concern how I would react if it was going to be called in, and then the interviewer also, related his experience with a black cadet, a troop mate of his, and this guy had a hard time. It was just trying to really discourage me from pursuing this career. And I didn't get in. I didn't get the job. Fast forward, I decided to get into military police. There was an opportunity to get into policing, and I didn't want to get into the army, to be honest with you, but there was an opportunity to get to do some type of policing. So I decided to join the army, and then when I was trained a military police officer and did all the training, and was sent to Nova Scotia, and where I served in Greenwood, Nova Scotia for a better part of almost 2 years. And then I realized that the military wasn't really sort of my environment, although I enjoyed my time there. But I decided to leave the military and then to try and get in with a civilian police organization, move to Toronto, and reapply to get in the RCMP. That's where I got the surprise of my life when I found out that the interviewers that I had with the RCMP earlier on, the first time around, had put some stuff in my file that was absolutely flooring. In other words, he characterized me as like a small time or drug pusher in my small hometown, and which was absolutely false. I had told him that yes, I had experience with marijuana, but that was just as a experimentation. But he went on to elaborate and fabricate this sort of narrative that I was really deep involved in the drug culture, and anyway, so I didn't know this, like I said, until I reapplied, and then my interviewer told me about this, and well, that's not true. And well, he said, well, you lied to us, and you didn't tell us the truth. You didn't tell it to us at the interview, and we can't accept you in the RCMP. So I was pretty devastated. But I fought back, and I went through to the Human Rights Commission and filed a complaint. And for about 2.5 years, I fought, and finally the RCMP settled, agreed to settle. In the meanwhile, I went to Ottawa U when I did a criminology degree. And while I was in Ottawa U, I thought, well, I might as well apply with the Ontario Provincial Police. And I was accepted with the Ontario Provincial Police. And upon graduation, I got stationed to Toronto. And while I was with the OPP doing training and everything, the RCMP made me an offer. And I had to, make a decision at the time whether I wanted to pursue with the OPP or stay with the RCMP. And in January 1988, I decided to accept the RCMP's offer and join the RCMP. And so it was a battle from the get-go. It was a battle, so left the OPP, joined the RCMP. I had some experiences with racism with the RCMP. Well, I can come back on that. With the OPP, rather. I can come on that later. But essentially, that's how I got into the RCMP.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So following on that, especially with your background, your experience as, I guess, an African Canadian law enforcement officer. So I have a two-pronged question. So would you say that is there a problem of racial profiling within Canadian police services? And the second part is, because we hear a lot about racial profiling, can you sort of explain to us what is actual racial profiling? Is it just random stops, like we call it routine stops, or is it more than that?
Well, the first part of your question, the answer is yes. Of course, it is systemic. It is throughout every police agency in this country. more so in with police agency where there's a black population, obviously, or indigenous as well, because it's not solely indigenous folks and black folks are the ones that are catching the most hell. I'm going to sort of put it very succinct.
Mhm.
That's who catch the hell for policing. Now, racial profiling is very simple. It is the fact that you base your decision as a police officer on a person's race, and to investigate, to stop them, to interrogate them, under the potential that those people might be up to no good or into criminal activities. That's it. There's formal definition in in the Bombardier case at the Supreme Court. That was kind of the definition that they used there, and that's kind of the one that's being sort of used from a jurisprudence standpoint. But there are some in Ontario, but essentially that's the targeting and by law enforcement under the pretext of security, public security, of people simply because of their race, gender, race, ethnic origin, religion. Yeah, that's essentially what it is now, and it's not limited to street checks or traffic stops. It can be anything from it can seep into the way you interview a subject, the way for instance, if you become a subject in an investigation, I will automatically, because of stereotypes and preconceived ideas, that you might be telling me lies, because if I believe that black people are more prone to be lying when they're caught doing things, then that's going to be the way I'm going to evaluate the veracity of anything you tell me. So it's broader. It can show itself in the way in which force is used. For instance, if black people are typically assumed to be more violent, more resistant, more prone to bursts of outrage, then as a police officer, I'm going to tend to use more force more readily because you're black. On and on and on it goes. So it's not, people have to realize that it's not simply because it's not just street checks or traffic stops.
Yes, interesting. So then this question comes as a former RCMP and OPP officer of obviously African Canadian descent and heritage. Have you racially profiled Black or Indigenous Canadians in your line of work?
Yeah, of course I have. Of course I have it, and that speaks to the fact that it's not about you being racist. It's about you sort of buying into a system that essentially has within its practices, its way of looking at things, the notion that certain group of people are more prone for certain criminal activities. Right. So if you're a black officer, it's not because you want to be harder on your people, or you want to be, you want to prove a point. Now, some people might want to do that. They might have purposefully be more, to show their colleagues that, hey, you know what, I am with you guys, and not, like they might be extra rigorous in the way in which they deal with black people. But mostly it's about the fact that, and I genuinely thought I was doing the right thing and being more selective in terms of who I would target, or how I would look at young black male, for instance. And so, yeah, of course I did it.
And then to the defense, just to play devil's advocate here, to the defense, we can hear even criminology or police officers will say, well, we look at statistics. We look at statistics like certain regions, certain, the numbers. Or unfortunately, it's not because of us. Maybe African Canadians or Indigenous Canadians are more, involved in this certain types of crimes in this certain type of area. So that's why we need to increase maybe the police, presence in that particular area. So what can you respond to that kind of argument? It's saying that it's not really racial. It's just we follow the statistics, right?
Well, statistics are based on data, and the way in which data is collected and then interpreted is biased, right? So, of course, if you believe that African Canadians in a particular community are more prone to criminalities, you're going to be targeting that criminality a whole lot more. And if you're targeting that community a whole lot more, you're going to get more statistics. Obviously, you're going to catch more people. It's like, you know what I mean? Like, the more you fish into a pond, you're bound to get more fish than if you fish a pond where you don't fish. And so those stats are self-fulfilling prophecies in the sense that, you get more stats, and then those stats in turn are turned into intelligence, right? So that's the whole notion of intelligence-based policing, where you base your operational priorities on statistics. But if it's garbage in, garbage out. So if the statistics are flawed from the outset, everything that you're going to base your activities on, then it's just gonna be perpetuating itself, right? So, yes. But there's no correlation. Black people, create more crimes statistically, given the population. They're given their population, but the thing is that they're more likely to be stopped, and therefore you're more of them to be stopped, and more likely to find something. They're more likely to be charged, and they're more likely to end up pleading guilty, because 90% of people in jail are guilty pleas, right? They're people that pleaded in some respect, and so if you don't have the means to get a good lawyer, you end up, in no disrespect to legal aid folks, but
for sure,
they end up cutting deals, and that's kind of a factory kind of operation. The more people you get, the more money you get, and you process them through, and then if somebody's going to be pleading guilty, then so but cops don't look at that. I mean, they look at the statistics for numbers, and that's it. Well, we're just doing what we need to do based on the numbers. But the numbers really, without context, is useless.
Yes, and since you, just to stay on this racial profiling subject here, since you're based in Montreal, and you see recently the issue with the SPVM, Service Police de la Ville de Montréal. I mean, after countless reports, I can remember researching dating back to 1984 and onward, there've been reports, there've been inquiries and stuff. It has been shown that there is an issue of racial profiling within the SPVM force. So what do you think we as a community, or we simply as Montrealers, first this resistance from the police itself, and also from the brotherhood, the police union, just the fact of acknowledging that it is a problem, so that we can engage in a conversation and find solutions and ways that we can fix it, because it's not a fatality, it's something that can be fixed. So why do you think that there's this resistance and sort of they become combative when it comes to the issue of racial profiling after being proven that it is a fact?
It goes back not to 1994. I think he said 1994. The first report,
1984. I meant
1984. The first report came out in 1984, the Carr report, and and there's been a couple of the coroner's inquiries that have specifically pointed to systemic and institutional racism within the SPVM very, very, very clearly that caused the death of Marcellus Francois, namely, and also Anthony Griffin. And although in the Villanueva inquiry they failed, they did identify again, systemic discrimination and disproportionate targeting of minorities and blacks and Hispanic, for instance, in Montreal, even though the officers weren't charged with anything. But yeah, so it's a report, it's research, it's coroner's inquests, and it's so the question is, why is it being still sort of, why is there so much pushback?
Mm-hmm.
Is that what it is? Because in policing, there's something that says we're never wrong. We don't do no wrong. So there's this very egotistical kind of approach by policing that says we don't do anything wrong. And so that's number one. Number two, in this particular province, of course, you have a government that has failed to identify or to recognize the existence, even the existence of systemic discrimination, which is dangerous on its face, because if there's no systemic problem, but you recognize that there's racism, that there are racist people, then you need to sort of go out to hunt racists.
Mm-hmm.
That's a tremendous Mission Impossible task, to go out and to find, because you're saying it systemically doesn't exist, then you got to go out and whack a mole. Like you got to whack the moles, because they're individuals that can be found, and you have to, it's an impossible mission. Okay, because you're saying a systemic doesn't exist. There's nothing systemic about it, which leads me to believe that there's a lack of understanding of the true definition of systemic discrimination. By the way, one of the things I said this week in an interview is that there isn't that many racist police officers out there. I don't believe that at all. I haven't really encountered that many racist police officers. I have encountered a whole lot of police officers that discriminated against black people by targeting and profiling and through stereotypes. But true racists, meaning that folks that believe that because they're white, they have a superiority over you. I may have encountered maybe 2 or 3 in my lifetime. That's the true definition of racist. It's people, or racism is the notion that a race is superior to another. That's the true definition of racism. Discrimination is different. The discrimination in law, is legal. It's differential treatment. Preferential differential treatment based on a person's race, which really affects race or gender, or it could be a variety of prohibited grounds. So that I have encountered, as I said, repeatedly in policing, but true racists are not there. So by not acknowledging a systemic dysfunctionality or institutional racism, then you got to go out and chase racists. Mm-hmm. Good luck. You're not going to find that many. So that's problematic. So what do we need to do? That was the second part of your question. What do we need to do? Well, it's multi-pronged, it's multifaceted. It has to involve the community. It has to involve community mobilization. I can get into that a little deeper, but I know you got more questions, so go ahead.
Yeah, that was sort of also my sort of last question in terms of now, because we need solution, because I think whether they recognize it or not, the people will impose that on them, because I think society at large, even if the government itself is not recognizing it, but I think there's a consciousness within the society, not the elite, the Mathieu Bocoté of the world or the elite denying it. But I think at least the vast majority of Quebecers realize there's an issue. So now to be more productive.
I disagree.
You disagree?
I disagree with 100%. I disagree with that. I disagree from a standpoint that I would say that, for instance, um, so I'm going to make an analogy here to the civil rights movement, right, in the United States and
Mhm.
Martin Luther King's days, and when what was happening in the South with respect to policing and using dogs and fire hoses and all of that. You've seen all the images
Mhm.
and black and white recordings and whatnot. Now, most of the white population were outraged internationally at that kind of stuff. Okay, that kind of stuff. But when it came, but that Martin Luther King said that, in '67, one of his last interviews, he said that basically he was disappointed because those folks that were with the movement, when kids were being chased by dogs and fire hoses and all of that, those people had disappeared when it came to providing blacks with decent housing, with proper employment, with. And so here, folks are really upset at what happened to Camara. For instance, here in Montreal, the Camara story, if you've been
Mhm.
following
Yes,
the black
Mamadi.
gentleman, Mamadi Camara. And so most Quebecers are very upset about that. Even the premier, he said, we don't like that. He said,
Mhm.
we don't like that. So those are the folks that are similar to the southern folks when dogs and fire hoses and all of that stuff was going up, but they won't recognize that, as I mentioned to you earlier, systemic racism and discrimination exists, and racial profiling goes beyond the street checks and those vehicle being stopped. And so I don't think that the majority of the population is convinced at all. In fact, 75%, Quebec had one of the highest rate of satisfaction with its police services, by the way.
Mhm.
And so you might think that in Montreal, it might, we might be in that right direction and convinced, but 35% of Montreal population are people of racialized ethnic minorities, right?
Mhm.
And so you've got a decent percentage here, but you go outside of Montreal and try and convince folks
Yeah,
that it actually
Lévis,
exists.
Saguenay, and all those
So
areas and
I'm
stuff.
not even sure we're there yet. So what we need to do is very simple. We need community mobilization, not necessarily the Black Lives Matter placards, and that is good. It attracts attention to a problem, to a situation, but it got to go beyond that. Then you got to look at making lobbying for legislative changes. You got to look at elections coming up, right? So you got to
Mhm.
look at carefully selecting, and typically municipal election people don't even bother with that. Well, that's
Mhm.
the wrong thing, because if you don't have the right people at the helm in the city, then you're not going to eliminate all of those bylaws that are being utilized by the police to
Mhm.
target minorities and vulnerable communities and incivilities and whatnot that are used as pretext really to target people. You're not gonna have that change. You're not gonna If you don't vote at the provincial government, you're not gonna have amendments to the police act or the Highway Traffic Act, which allows police officers to uh, you know, stop people at random to enforce the Highway Traffic Act. And so it's not just the marching. The marching is to draw attention to a problem, but then you need to get out there, get up to the ballot. You need to file complaints. A lot of people file complaints on YouTube and on Facebook, and those complaints are useless because they don't go nowhere. It's very cathartic to complain about something on YouTube, and but at the end of the day, please don't even look at that because it's meaningless. But
Mhm.
but then you got to go and use the systems that are in place to hold the people accountable. So it's a joint between changing public perception. Okay, you got to get the public on your side, not just when there's a Khmer type of scenario, or a lawyer in Montreal, there was a lawyer that got racially profiled, and people were absolutely outraged. A lawyer got racially profiled, as if the police knew that that guy was a lawyer. he had a something in his forehead. No, he's a black guy. That's it. He's a black guy. We don't care whether you're a judge, whether you're picking up garbage, or whether you have no jobs, or whether we don't care. You're black. That's it. And if I do racial profiling, that's all I'd see is black guy. I don't care if your father was a judge, and we don't care. Mm-hmm. And if you're from Africa, or if you're from Rimouski, or if from Haiti or Jamaica, that's irrelevant. So folks need to realize that unless we come together as a group, okay, regardless of professions and regardless of origins and all of that, we come together and realize that any one of us could be police officers, could be a firefighter. Any one of us could be targeted at any given time. Mm-hmm. Unless we do that, then you're going to have fragmented efforts, which really amount to nothing at the end of the day. So anyway, that was my little spiel, soapbox kind of thing. But
no, it's really learned. And then so that to end on this question, then, for what advice would you have for a young Black Canadian sitting there thinking about joining any police service out there in Canada? Because my philosophy is we can also, because I believe in a inside and outside approach. While we have people fighting from the outside, also we need, the society, the services, the public servants to reflect also the society, right? So I need young Black men, Black women, or Hispanics or Indigenous to also join those forces so they can try at least to change the culture from within, because the more you are in, the more you're trying to change the culture, I believe there's still value in that. So what advice can you have for young Black, Hispanic, Indigenous, or whatever, people of color or minorities joining the police forces? What advice do you have for what to expect, how to conduct themselves? Because it's still tough to be a police officer. It's still tough. It's a tough job. We acknowledge that, I don't think many, even in Black community, we are anti-cop or whatever. It's just, we just want to be afforded the same kind of benefit of that or security of our persons and our properties. So as a former police officer in law enforcement, what advice would you have?
It's a good job. Well-paid job. It's a good job. It's a good job. If you're interested in having a stable profession, it's a good job. It pays well, relatively well. You're not going to become rich, but it's, a good job, and you're achieving their purpose. A purposeful job, and so we need to open up the profession for these folks, which is also part of my sort of the advocacy, is to open the profession, right? So we need. So I would really encourage folks to join. Now you got to join knowing that it's like any other organization. There's racist or people with discrimination in the legal profession, in the law society, in the judiciary. If you want to become a doctor, you'll run into racist people there with prejudice. It doesn't matter. They're everywhere. You know what I mean? Like, they're everywhere. So policing, you just got to know that, it's a microcosm of society, and you will find them there as well. But I really encourage folks to join and enjoy the ride. Now, changing things from the inside is another pair of it's another ball of wax, because you will only get to that point from an equity standpoint once you attain a certain critical number. And we're just not Quebec. It'll be 100 years at this rate. It'll be 100 years before they get some type of representation. It'll be 100 years.
Mhm.
And I don't think so. We need some changes as well in the Policing Act and the way in which the point of entry is to the profession and so on. Uh, um, but no, I do encourage folks to join, and it's a good job, and you provides you with a lot of opportunities. RCMP, as much as I'm a detractor of the organization, is because I think they can do a whole lot better for its employees. I mean, I'm advocating. I'm working with Black officers right now in the inside that are suffering discrimination. Okay, in a systemic fashion, denial of promotion, you name it, and so I'm helping them out as well to access to the various systems. So it's not a bed of roses, but I would definitely encourage folks to follow their dreams, right? If that's what they want to do, don't let nobody turn you around, and because you're gonna find bad people everywhere. And as I said, like I said, it's not about people being racist. It's about people. It's about systems, from the inside. It's about promotional systems, about reward systems, about a variety of systems or systemic um, uh, policies and practices which have disproportionate negative effects on us. And even if you think that Employment Equity Act and all of that protects us, this is just farcical at best. These are just things that they have in place to sort of give the appearance of equity and all of that. But when you peel the onions and you see the accountability is just not there. So,
Yeah.
but I encourage people. It's a long story, but I just encourage people if that's what they want to do, they ought to be pursuing it.
Definitely. Well, Mr. Babineau, thank you very much for sitting out with us. And please continue the good fight in terms of equity and social justice. And I still believe that there's more in an awakening, and then there's brighter future ahead of us. So if there's
We gotta
any
do that.
more stuff, we'll make sure to reach out, and so we can get more insight from you.
Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Hey man, yo kakampe.